It was a quiet morning in the small town of Brookfield, where people usually started their day with a cup of coffee and a smile. The sky was soft gray, hinting that rain might fall later and the streets were still waking up. Officer Cole parked his patrol car outside a local coffee shop, rubbing his eyes after a long night shift. He'd been up for almost 15 hours and his patience was thin. All he wanted was a strong coffee to wake himself up before heading to the station for a meeting. Inside, the air smelled of roasted beans and pastries. The place was buzzing softly with people chatting, workers typing on laptops, and the faint sound of a song playing in the background. Cole walked in wearing his uniform. He noticed how some people looked at him, a mix of respect and hesitation. It was something he'd gotten used to. Being a police officer made him feel in control, powerful even. He joined the line, tapping his foot impatiently. Ahead of him stood a tall black man in a neat dark suit, holding his phone in one hand and quietly waiting his turn. Cole barely paid him any attention at first. His mind was more focused on the caffeine he needed. The man ordered politely, smiled at the barista, and stepped aside to wait for his drink. Cole moved forward to order his usual, a large black coffee. As he waited, the barista mistakenly handed the first drink to the man in the suit. It wasn't even the man's order, but he took a quick look at it, smiled, and said gently, "I think this one's not mine. It might belong to the officer." Cole, tired and irritated, rolled his eyes. "Yeah, that figures," he muttered under his breath. The man heard him but didn't say a word. He simply handed the cup back to the barista, still calm and polite. Something about the man's calmness made Cole even more annoyed. Maybe it was because he looked too composed, too confident, the kind of confidence Cole didn't have that morning. The barista apologized, quickly made another drink, and gave Cole his order. As Cole grabbed the cup, he noticed the man still waiting patiently for his turn. Cole muttered something sarcastic, too low for most people to hear, but just loud enough for the man to catch it. "Some people think they own the place." The man glanced at him briefly but didn't respond. His silence somehow irritated Cole even more. When the barista called the next order, the man reached for his coffee, gave a kind nod, and turned to leave. But as he stepped past Cole, the officer's frustration boiled over. Maybe it was the long hours, or maybe it was his ego, but what he did next shocked everyone around. He spat toward the floor near the man's shoe and said coldly, "Watch where you're walking." The room fell silent. The sound of the music faded in the background as everyone looked up, frozen. The man stopped, looked down at the spot, and then slowly lifted his gaze toward Cole. There was no anger in his eyes, just quiet disappointment. For a moment, the two stood face to face, the air thick with tension. The man took a deep breath, then bent slightly, wiped the edge of his shoe with a napkin, and stood tall again. "You have a good day, officer," he said softly. His tone wasn't sarcastic, man, it was sincere, calm, and strangely powerful. He turned and walked out of the coffee shop, leaving everyone in awkward silence. The barista looked at Cole, unsure what to say. One woman sitting nearby shook her head and whispered, "That wasn't right." Cole felt the weight of their eyes on him but brushed it off. "People are too sensitive these days," he said, trying to laugh, but no one joined him. The laughter died in his throat. He grabbed his coffee and walked out, pretending not to care, though a small voice in the back of his head whispered that he'd gone too far. He ignored it. He told himself the man probably deserved it for acting too good for everyone. Still, that calm look the man gave him, not angry, not scared, just deeply disappointed, stayed in his mind as he drove away. The rain began to fall lightly as Cole reached the station. He sat in his car for a moment, watching the drops hit his windshield. He tried to shake off the feeling of guilt, but it clung to him. He told himself he was just tired, that he didn't mean it. But deep down, he knew the truth. He'd let his temper show, and it had made him look small. When he finally walked into the station, a buzz of excitement ran through the room. Some officers were talking about an upcoming meeting with a special guest from the city headquarters. No one knew much, just that someone high-ranking was coming to help reform the department's leadership and community programs. Cole didn't think much of it. He was too busy trying to push away the morning's embarrassment. He told himself to forget it. After all, the man at the coffee shop was just another stranger, someone he'd never see again. That evening, as Cole got home, he turned on the news. The anchor mentioned that the city was sending a new regional leader to oversee police reforms in multiple districts, a respected community leader and law enforcement expert, known for his work in improving race relations and fairness in policing, the reporter said. A small picture appeared in the corner of the screen, the same man from the coffee shop smiling confidently at a podium. Cole froze. His hand tightened around his coffee mug. The name under the photo read Anthony Daniels, newly appointed Regional Director of Police Affairs. His stomach dropped. He leaned forward, staring at the screen, hoping he was seeing things. But there was no mistake. The man he'd insulted that morning was the new head of their department. The same man who had stayed calm, quiet, and respectful while Cole had acted like a fool. For a long moment, Cole didn't move. His face felt hot and his heart thumped in his chest. He thought about that look, not angry, not vengeful, just disappointed. Now he understood why it felt so powerful. The man had carried himself with dignity, while Cole had lost his. That night, Cole barely slept. He kept imagining walking into the station and seeing Mr. Daniels again, this time not as a stranger, but as his superior. The idea made him feel sick. He wondered if Daniels would recognize him, if he would bring up what happened. Maybe he would have him written up or worse, fired. But what scared Cole most wasn't the punishment. It was the shame. The idea that someone like Mr. Daniels, calm, intelligent, and professional, had seen him at his absolute worst. He had acted out of arrogance and prejudice, and now there was no way to take it back. Morning came, gray and cold, just like the day before. Cole looked at his uniform hanging on the chair. For the first time, he didn't feel proud putting it on. He saw himself differently now. He saw how small one moment of anger could make a man look. When he arrived at the station, everyone was preparing for the big introduction. Officers were straightening their ties, brushing their jackets, making sure everything looked perfect. Cole stayed quiet, his stomach in knots. He tried to hide in the back of the group, hoping Mr. Daniels wouldn't notice him. Then the doors opened. The chief walked in first, followed by a few senior officers. And right behind them came Mr. Daniels, the same man from the coffee shop, calm as ever, wearing the same kind of gentle smile he'd had before. The room went silent as everyone stood to attention. Mr. Daniels shook hands, greeted the officers, and began to speak. His voice was steady, confident, and warm. He talked about unity, respect, and the importance of treating every person with dignity, no matter their background. Cole stood there, unable to look up, every word cutting deep. Daniels didn't show any sign of recognition. If he remembered Cole, he didn't let it show. But for Cole, every moment was a reminder of what he had done, and how far he had to go to make it right. That was the day everything changed for him, though he didn't know it yet. What started as an ordinary morning in a coffee shop was about to become the lesson of a lifetime, one that would test his pride, his integrity, and the kind of man he truly wanted to be. Cole sat at his desk, staring at the stack of reports in front of him but seeing nothing. The previous morning at the coffee shop kept replaying in his mind like a bad movie. And now, knowing that the man he had insulted was coming to the station as their new leader made everything worse. He kept imagining Mr. Daniels walking through the doors, calm, confident, with that same quiet power he had shown before. Cole couldn't shake the feeling of shame, and he didn't know how he could face him. The station was busier than usual. Officers were preparing for the first meeting with the new regional director. Some of them whispered among themselves, guessing what kind of person he would be. Cole tried to stay in the background, hoping to avoid drawing attention. He didn't want anyone to notice how nervous he was, but he couldn't avoid the unease that had settled over him like a heavy blanket. When the meeting was called, Cole followed the other officers into the large conference room. It was filled with the low hum of chatter and the clicking of pens. The walls were decorated with plaques and certificates, reminders of past achievements and honorable service. But for Cole, they felt like reminders of how small he had acted yesterday, and he wished the floor could open up and swallow him whole. The chief of police entered first, followed by a few senior officers. Then as the doors opened wider, Mr. Daniels walked in. Cole froze instantly. The same man from the coffee shop, calm and dignified, scanned the room, greeting everyone with a firm handshake and a small nod. He carried himself like someone who belonged there, confident but not arrogant, commanding attention without demanding it. Cole's stomach turned. He could feel his hands sweat. He wanted to shrink, to disappear into the back of the room. He kept his eyes down, praying Daniels wouldn't notice him, but deep down he knew it was impossible. That calm, observant look made it clear that Mr. Daniels noticed everything, including him. Daniels began speaking. His voice was steady, warm, and clear. He spoke about the importance of respect in law enforcement, the role of trust between officers and the community, and the need for fairness and equality. Cole listened, each word hitting him harder than the last. This was the man he had disrespected, the man he had treated unfairly, and here he was teaching lessons to everyone, including Cole. After the introductory remarks, Daniels opened the floor for questions. Officers asked about new policies, community outreach, and training programs. Cole stayed silent. He didn't know if he could speak, and he certainly didn't want to admit the truth about what had happened at the coffee shop. Over the next few days, Daniels held workshops and meetings with the officers. He focused on leadership, empathy, and accountability. He shared stories about his life, about times when he had been judged unfairly, overlooked, or underestimated because of the color of his skin. His words weren't angry or bitter. They were honest, measured, and powerful. Cole felt uncomfortable listening, but he also felt a strange pull, a desire to be better, to understand, to change. Cole began to notice other officers reacting differently. Some were defensive, dismissing Daniels' lessons. Others were quietly thoughtful, taking his words to heart. For Cole, it was personal. He couldn't stop thinking about the morning at the coffee shop. He had been the one to act arrogantly, to assume he was better than someone else. And now he had to work under that same person, knowing the truth. One afternoon, Daniels called the officers to a group discussion. He asked them to pair up and talk about a situation where they had acted unfairly or let prejudice affect their judgment. Cole's stomach twisted. He didn't want to talk about his moment, but he also knew he couldn't lie. He couldn't explain this away. As the pairs discussed, Cole found himself paired with another officer, someone he had known for years. They started talking about past mistakes in small cases, avoiding personal issues at first. But as the conversation went on, Cole realized he couldn't escape the truth. He had to confront it, even if just in his own mind for now. That evening, Cole stayed late at the station, reviewing his reports. He thought about what Daniels had said in the meetings, that leadership wasn't about authority, it was about responsibility, respect, and honesty. He reflected on how he had failed in those areas, not just at the coffee shop, but in other moments of his career where he had let frustration or prejudice guide his actions. He remembered a call from months earlier when he had been impatient with a civilian who didn't understand the rules. He had acted with unnecessary force, later justifying it to himself because he was doing his job. Now he saw a pattern. This wasn't just one morning of poor judgment. It was part of a bigger problem. For the first time, Cole felt the weight of his actions. He realized that changing his behavior wouldn't just be about avoiding mistakes in the future. It would mean confronting his own biases, admitting when he was wrong, and taking real steps to act differently. He wasn't sure he could do it, but he knew he had to try. The next day, Daniels introduced a new initiative. Officers were to participate in community engagement programs, visiting schools, attending local events, and spending time understanding the neighborhoods they served. It was a hands-on approach to build trust and empathy. Cole's first assignment was to accompany Daniels himself to a youth center. Cole was nervous. He didn't know how to act around Daniels in a casual, community-focused setting. He felt exposed, like every move he made would be judged. But he forced himself to stay calm and professional. As they arrived at the center, children and teenagers greeted them warmly, asking questions about policing and safety. Daniels engaged with them patiently, listening carefully and answering each question thoughtfully. Cole watched Daniels interact and realized the power of respect and presence. The kids trusted him immediately because he treated them with dignity, not because of his authority. Cole thought back to the coffee shop incident again. He had completely misunderstood what true strength and leadership looked like. Spitting on that man had been an act of weakness, not power. During the visit, Daniels asked Cole to help explain safety procedures and basic rules of conduct to a small group of teens. Cole hesitated, feeling self-conscious. But as he began to speak, he found himself wanting to be sincere, to genuinely connect and teach. The teens listened, and for the first time in a long while, Cole felt a sense of purpose beyond just following orders. After the session, Daniels pulled Cole aside. He didn't mention the coffee shop. He simply said, "It takes courage to face yourself and change. That's the real test of character." Cole nodded silently, taking in the words. He felt the truth in them. He knew Daniels could have humiliated him for what he did, but instead he was showing him a path forward. Over the next weeks, Cole threw himself into the programs. He spent time at community events, listened to residents' concerns, and reflected on his own behavior. Every interaction reminded him of the coffee shop incident, not as a shameful moment to hide, but as a lesson that had started a long-needed change. He started noticing small shifts in himself. He was more patient, more aware of how he spoke to people, and more willing to listen without judgment. Other officers began noticing the change too, commenting quietly on how he seemed more approachable, calmer, and thoughtful. Cole realized that this transformation was only possible because he had confronted the consequences of his actions and had someone like Daniels guiding him. By the end of the month, the officers had begun to embrace the community programs fully. Trust between the department and the residents was improving, and morale among the officers had risen. Cole had a new respect for leadership, one that relied on empathy, integrity, and humility, not fear or arrogance. Still, he carried the memory of the coffee shop with him. It wasn't a memory of shame anymore, but a reminder that change begins with a single moment of honesty, and that real growth often comes from recognizing where we have failed. He knew that day was the first step toward becoming the kind of officer and the kind of person he wanted to be. Cole understood now that leadership wasn't about who had the most authority or who could assert power the loudest. It was about who could inspire respect, who could admit mistakes, and who could guide others to do the same. Mr. Daniels had shown him that, not through punishment or anger, but through patience, example, and genuine understanding. And for Cole, that was a lesson he would never forget. Cole woke up early that morning, the sunlight creeping slowly through his blinds. The events of the past weeks had changed something inside him. He felt lighter in some ways, more aware of his actions and their effects on people around him. But there was still a knot of anxiety in his chest whenever he thought about Mr. Daniels. It wasn't fear anymore. It was respect, and mixed with a feeling that he had so much more to learn. At the station, the energy was different. Officers were chatting more about the community programs, about the events they had attended, and even about their personal growth. Cole, however, felt the weight of personal responsibility more than ever. He knew he couldn't just follow instructions. He had to actively change his behavior, not just for Daniels, but for himself and the people he served. Daniels called for another department-wide meeting that morning. This time, he didn't just speak about leadership in general terms. He wanted to address real-life challenges officers faced daily, especially those moments when judgment could be clouded by personal feelings or bias. Cole felt his stomach tighten as Daniels began speaking. Every word seemed to reach into the core of who he was, reminding him of his own failures, but also offering a chance to grow. "Every officer in this room," Daniels said, "has the power to protect, serve, and guide. But every officer also has the power to harm if they act without thought, without respect, or without understanding. Recognizing that is the first step to becoming a better officer and a better person." Cole listened carefully, feeling the truth in Daniels' words. He thought back to the coffee shop, to the moment he had spat at a man who had done nothing wrong. It wasn't just a careless action. It was a reflection of a mindset he had allowed to grow over the years. He realized that being a police officer wasn't about authority or intimidation. It was about service, empathy, and integrity. After the meeting, Daniels organized a hands-on exercise for the officers. They were to work in small teams, visiting different neighborhoods to talk to residents, understand their concerns, and identify ways the police could help improve the community. Cole was nervous. These were situations where he had previously been impatient or dismissive. But he also knew that this was exactly where he needed to be. Cole and his partner, a senior officer who had been with the department for over 20 years, walked to a local community center. Children were playing outside, and neighbors were tending to small gardens. The energy was calm and welcoming. Cole noticed how naturally Daniels engaged with people in this environment. He didn't command respect through rank. He earned it through kindness, attention, and genuine concern. Cole approached a group of residents hesitantly, unsure how to start the conversation. Daniels walked beside him, silently observing, giving subtle encouragement without being overbearing. Cole began by introducing himself, explaining that the department wanted to hear from them directly, to learn what they needed from their police officers. At first, the residents were cautious. Some had encountered officers who had dismissed their concerns or treated them unfairly, but Cole listened. He asked questions, repeated back what he heard, and made an effort to validate their experiences. For the first time, he realized the impact of simply listening without judgment. People opened up. They shared their fears, frustrations, and hopes. Cole felt a mix of guilt and determination. He wished he had always approached people like this, instead of letting bias and impatience guide his actions. As the day went on, Cole started noticing small changes in himself. He wasn't defensive anymore. He didn't feel the need to assert authority at every moment. He began to genuinely think about how his words and actions affected others. For instance, when a young man voiced frustration about police patrols in his neighborhood, Cole didn't dismiss him. Instead, he acknowledged the concern, asked questions, and took notes, showing that he cared about finding solutions rather than being right. During a short break, Cole and Daniels walked through the park talking quietly. Daniels didn't lecture him, didn't scold him for past mistakes. He asked Cole questions instead. "How do you feel when someone is judged unfairly?" he asked. Cole hesitated. It was hard to admit, but he replied honestly, "I feel guilty, and I realize I've judged people too quickly before." Daniels nodded. Recognition is the first step toward change. The rest comes from action. The conversation stayed with Cole all day. Every interaction, every moment in the community reinforced the lesson that real leadership was about humility, understanding, and taking responsibility. He began to see the world differently, realizing that respect was earned through behavior, not assumed through uniform or authority. By late afternoon, the team returned to the station. Cole felt exhausted, but it was a good exhaustion, the kind that comes from working with purpose. Daniels gathered everyone for a debriefing session. Officers shared what they had learned, highlighting moments where they had acted differently than they might have in the past. Cole hesitated to speak at first, then decided to share. I realized today that I've been impatient, judgmental, and sometimes unfair," he admitted. "And I know that makes it harder for people to trust us. I'm going to work on changing that starting now." There was a pause, and then Daniels nodded approvingly. "Acknowledging it publicly is a strong first step," he said. "The next steps will be even more important. Your actions every day in every interaction." Cole left the debriefing feeling lighter, more motivated. For the first time, he understood that change wasn't something that happened instantly. It was a daily process, a choice to act differently each time. He knew he had a long way to go, but he also knew he had started on the right path. The following week, Cole participated in a youth mentorship program organized by Daniels. He spent hours at the local high school, teaching students about safety, responsibility, and communication. At first, he was unsure how to connect, but he remembered Daniels' guidance: to listen, to empathize, and to be present. Slowly, he built trust with the students. They began asking questions, sharing their stories, and seeking his advice. One afternoon, a young boy approached him. "I'm scared of cops sometimes," the boy admitted. "I've seen them treat people badly." Cole looked at him, nodded, and said honestly, "I understand, and I want to do better. I want to help people feel safe, not scared." The boy smiled faintly, and Cole realized that honesty and humility could create a bridge that authority alone never could. Every evening, Cole reflected on the day's experiences. He thought about the coffee shop again, realizing that the man he had insulted had taught him an unforgettable lesson, not by being harsh or angry, but by being patient, calm, and dignified. Daniels had expanded on that lesson, showing him that leadership wasn't about ego but about integrity, respect, and understanding. Weeks turned into months. Cole noticed himself reacting differently in tense situations. He no longer let frustration dictate his behavior. He listened more, judged less, and focused on solutions rather than asserting power. Other officers began to notice the change as well, and some even asked him for advice on how to handle difficult interactions. Cole was surprised but quietly proud. He realized that change, once genuine, could influence others in ways he hadn't imagined. At one point, Daniels pulled him aside during a training session. "Cole," he said, "I see the effort you're making. It's not perfect yet, but it's real. And that's what matters. Keep it up every day." Cole felt a sense of gratitude he hadn't experienced before. He wasn't just learning lessons about policing. He was learning lessons about life, about character, and about what it truly meant to be responsible for one's actions. That evening, Cole returned home, tired but reflective. He sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, thinking about how far he had come. He no longer felt the shame that had dominated his mornings before, but he also didn't forget the lessons that had brought him to this point. The memory of the coffee shop lingered, not as a mark of failure, but as the starting point of a transformation he hadn't known he needed. He realized that moments of failure often held the seeds of growth. If he could face the consequences of his own mistakes, acknowledge them honestly, and work to change, he could become a better officer, a better colleague, and a better human being. And deep down, Cole knew that the lessons he was learning now would stay with him for the rest of his career, and for the rest of his life. The man from the coffee shop, now his mentor and leader, had shown him that real strength came from patience, understanding, and the courage to do the right thing. Even when it was difficult, Cole smiled faintly, feeling a sense of hope he hadn't felt in years. He knew the journey wasn't over, but he was ready to continue one step at a time, guided by the example of someone who had turned a moment of conflict into a lifelong lesson. Cole arrived at the station earlier than usual that morning. The quiet hum of fluorescent lights and the faint tapping of keyboards greeted him as he walked in. He felt a mix of nervousness and determination. Today was different. Today he decided to take a step he had been avoiding for weeks. He needed to face what he had done at the coffee shop, not as a stranger, not as an abstract memory, but directly, honestly, and openly. He waited for a moment, watching Mr. Daniels move through the station with his usual calm presence. The new leader greeted officers and staff warmly, stopping to shake hands or listen briefly to a concern. Everything about Daniels' demeanor reminded Cole of that day at the coffee shop, calm, composed, and unshakable. He took a deep breath, steeling himself. Today he would own his mistake. When the office was quiet, Cole knocked on Daniels' door and stepped inside. Daniels looked up, smiled gently, and gestured for him to sit. Cole's heart raced. He had rehearsed this moment countless times in his mind, wondering what he would say, how Daniels would react, and whether this meeting would ruin him entirely. But now, sitting across from him, he realized that words might be simpler than he had imagined. I need to apologize," Cole began, voice slightly shaky, "for what happened at the coffee shop. I acted disrespectfully. There's no excuse for it. I'm sorry." Daniels listened quietly, his calm expression unwavering. He nodded once, encouraging Cole to continue. Cole took a deep breath. "I want to be honest because I know I need to change. I don't expect forgiveness right away or maybe ever. I just wanted you to know that I understand what I did was wrong." There was a pause. Cole's hands trembled slightly as he gripped the edge of the chair. Then Daniels spoke. "Thank you for your honesty, Cole. Admitting mistakes is hard, but it's the first step toward real change. I'm not here to punish you for a moment of poor judgment. I'm here to help you grow as an officer and as a person." Cole felt a strange mix of relief and humility. He had expected anger, judgment, perhaps even formal consequences. But Daniels's response was different, supportive yet firm, focused not on the past but on the potential for the future. It was exactly the kind of leadership Cole had been slowly learning to respect. Daniels leaned back slightly. "I'm assigning you a role that will test your skills, your patience, and your integrity. You'll be leading a new community outreach program. It won't be easy, and it will require honesty, empathy, and dedication, but I believe you can do it, and if you commit fully." Cole's heart pounded. This was unexpected. He had feared reprimand, not responsibility. I accept," he said, his voice steadier now. "I want to do better, and I'll give this my all." Daniels nodded, a small smile on his face. "Good. Your actions from now on will speak louder than words. This is your opportunity to demonstrate that change is real and lasting. Lead with integrity, and others will follow." The first few days of the program were challenging. Cole was tasked with coordinating a series of events aimed at connecting officers with the community. There were neighborhood meetings, school visits, and volunteer activities, At first he felt awkward. People remembered past encounters with officers who had dismissed their concerns, and he could see the skepticism in their eyes. He knew he had to earn their trust, not assume it. During one meeting at a local community center, Cole faced a room filled with residents who were hesitant to speak. Some arms were crossed, some people avoided eye contact, and a few muttered under their breath. Cole remembered Daniel's advice: listen first, speak second. He introduced himself honestly, explaining his role and acknowledging that he had made mistakes in the past. Not in detail, but enough to show sincerity. Gradually, the room opened up. Residents began sharing their experiences and concerns. They talked about safety, policing methods, and how officers could better support their neighborhoods. Cole listened without judgment, repeating back what he heard and asking clarifying questions. For the first time, he realized that genuine engagement wasn't about authority or control. It was about connection, understanding, and follow-through. The next week, Cole accompanied Daniels to a local youth program. They were there to teach students about safety, conflict resolution, and communication. At first, Cole felt unsure how to address the teenagers. They were candid, sometimes blunt, and not afraid to challenge authority. But as he followed Daniel's lead, he realized that respect wasn't commanded. It was earned through patience and honesty. A young girl raised her hand during a discussion. "Sometimes I feel scared of the police," she said quietly. Cole felt a pang of guilt. He remembered his own past behavior, the coffee shop incident, and times he had acted impatiently. He knelt slightly to meet her gaze and said, "I understand why you feel that way. Some officers have made mistakes, and I've seen that too. My goal is to change that, starting with listening and learning." Her eyes widened slightly and she nodded. The other students began to ask more questions, sharing their experiences and listening to the advice Cole and Daniels offered. Cole realized that real trust required vulnerability, showing that he was human, capable of mistakes, but willing to learn and act differently. At the end of the session, Daniels pulled Cole aside. "You handled that well," he said quietly. "Being honest and humble is more powerful than any uniform or badge. Keep leading with that mindset, and you'll make a real difference." Cole nodded, grateful for the guidance. He knew he still had much to learn, but he could see the impact of his actions already. Over the following weeks, Cole dedicated himself fully to the program. He organized community events, participated in school visits, and spent time engaging with residents one-on-one. He became more patient, listening carefully, asking questions, and taking notes. People began to notice the difference. Officers who had been skeptical at first started showing interest in his approach, and residents began to trust the police more. One afternoon, a resident approached Cole after a neighborhood meeting. "I've seen you working hard to connect with people," the man said. "It's different from what I've seen before. I appreciate that you're trying to make a change." Cole felt a wave of humility and pride. This was the first time he felt his efforts were making a tangible impact. At home that evening, Cole reflected on everything he had learned. The coffee shop incident, which had once been a source of shame, now felt like the starting point of a journey he could not have imagined. The act of facing his mistake, admitting it, and committing to change had opened a door to personal growth and responsibility. He realized that leadership, real leadership, wasn't about authority or power. It was about integrity, empathy, and the courage to confront one's own faults. It was about creating an environment where others could learn, grow, and trust. And for the first time in his career, Cole felt that he was truly becoming the officer he had always wanted to be, one who served with respect and honesty, and who made a difference beyond enforcing rules. Daniels continued to guide him, offering advice without judgment, encouraging action over words. Cole followed slowly but steadily, learning lessons that could not be taught in a classroom or handbook. Each day brought challenges, but also opportunities to apply what he had learned, to act with fairness, and to connect with people genuinely. By the end of the month, the community outreach program was thriving. Officers were more engaged with residents, relationships were improving, and trust was slowly rebuilding. Cole saw the impact of his actions not just on others, but on himself. He felt more confident, more patient, and more aware of how his behavior shaped the world around him. One evening, as the sun set over Brookfield, Cole sat at his desk and thought back to the coffee shop. He no longer felt shame, but he remembered the lesson it had taught him. The man he had insulted had become the mentor who changed his life, not through punishment or anger, but through patience, dignity, and leadership. Cole knew the journey wasn't over. There would be more challenges, more moments where he might falter, but he also knew that he had learned how to confront those moments honestly, to grow from them and to lead by example. The transformation that had begun with a single act of disrespect had now become a lifelong lesson in humility, integrity, and the power of change. As he left the station that evening, Cole felt a sense of hope and determination. He had faced his past, learned from it, and started building a better future, for himself, for the community, and for the officers who would follow his example. He knew that true leadership wasn't given. It was earned through every choice, every action, and every moment of courage to do what was right. Months had passed since the coffee shop incident, yet Cole never forgot that day. It had been a moment of shame that had turned into a turning point in his life. He had grown in ways he never expected, but the lessons were far from over. Every day brought new challenges, and every interaction was a chance to test the progress he had made. Cole had become a central figure in the community outreach program Daniels had entrusted him with. Residents now recognized him, not just as a police officer, but as someone who genuinely cared. Children waved when he passed, adults greeted him with cautious smiles, and even skeptical neighbors approached him to discuss concerns. It was a remarkable change from the distant, intimidating officer he had once been. The department had started noticing the transformation as well. Other officers came to him for advice on handling delicate situations, on communicating with residents respectfully, and on building trust in neighborhoods that had long been wary of law enforcement. Cole felt a quiet pride, not from authority, but from knowing he had made a positive difference. One morning, Daniels called him into his office. Cole's heart beat faster than usual, though this time it wasn't fear. He trusted Daniels and knew that whatever conversation was about, it would be about growth and opportunity. Daniels smiled as Cole entered. "Cole, I've been watching your progress," Daniels began. "You've shown remarkable dedication, patience, and integrity. Your efforts have not gone unnoticed." Cole felt a lump in his throat. Hearing praise from the man he had once disrespected was overwhelming. Daniels continued, "I want you to lead a new initiative, a mentorship program for younger officers. They will learn from your experiences, your successes, and yes, your mistakes. Leadership isn't just about teaching the right actions. It's also about guiding others through the wrong ones and helping them find the right path." Cole nodded, humbled by the responsibility. He thought about the officer he had been months ago, impulsive, impatient, judgmental, and realized how far he had come. Leading younger officers was a chance to pay forward the lessons he had learned and ensure that the mistakes he had made wouldn't be repeated. As the mentorship program began, Cole faced new challenges. Young officers were eager but inexperienced, and some resisted guidance. Cole found himself drawing upon all the lessons Daniels had taught him, listening without judgment, explaining with patience, and modeling integrity through actions rather than words. He encouraged them to reflect on their decisions, to confront their biases, and to act with empathy in every situation. One day, during a ride-along with a new recruit, they encountered a tense situation. A resident was frustrated about a noise complaint and was initially hostile. In the past, Cole might have acted defensively, asserting authority to control the situation. But now he approached it differently. He listened, acknowledged the resident's feelings, and calmly explained the law and procedures. By the end, the resident left feeling heard and respected. The recruit looked at Cole with wide eyes, clearly impressed. Cole smiled quietly. This was exactly the outcome he had learned to strive for. The mentorship program quickly gained attention within the department. Officers who had been skeptical began to recognize its value. Cole noticed that the culture of the station was shifting slowly but surely. Respect, empathy, and thoughtful communication were becoming more prominent in daily interactions. He realized that positive change was contagious, and that his own growth had the power to influence others. One afternoon, Daniels invited Cole to a community celebration, honoring the officers who had contributed most to the outreach programs. Residents, children, and local leaders gathered to share stories of positive interactions and community improvements. Cole felt a mix of pride and humility as he listened. People spoke about officers who had gone beyond their duties to make neighborhoods safer, to listen and to help. When it came time to recognize individuals, Daniels called Cole forward. "Cole has been a model of growth and integrity," Daniel said. "He faced his own mistakes, learned from them, and turned those lessons into meaningful action. He is a reminder that true leadership comes from honesty, humility, and dedication." Cole's eyes widened and a few tears threatened to fall. He had never expected this kind of recognition, especially from someone he had once wronged. He stepped forward, shaking hands with Daniels, and looked out at the crowd. Residents smiled warmly, colleagues nodded respectfully, and he realized that the journey he had started months ago had not only changed him but had begun to impact the community and the department as a whole. After the celebration, Cole walked through the neighborhood reflecting on his journey. He passed the coffee shop where it had all started. The memory of spitting on that man, of acting in anger and prejudice, once filled him with shame. Now it reminded him of how far he had come. The man he had insulted had become his mentor, guiding him to become the officer and person he was meant to be. The coffee shop was no longer a place of humiliation. It was a symbol of transformation. In the following weeks, Cole continued to expand his mentorship program. He worked closely with recruits and seasoned officers alike, encouraging discussions about ethics, empathy, and accountability. He used real-life scenarios to help them navigate difficult situations, emphasizing that mistakes were opportunities for learning rather than moments for punishment. His approach began to shape the culture of the station, fostering an environment where officers felt supported, challenged, and inspired to act with integrity. Cole also continued his work in the community. He visited schools, senior centers, and neighborhood meetings, building relationships based on respect and trust. He listened to stories of fear, frustration, and hope, always responding with honesty and understanding. Over time, he noticed that residents were more willing to approach the police with concerns, knowing they would be heard and respected. The transformation wasn't immediate, but it was steady and tangible. One evening, after a long day at the station, Cole sat in his car, reflecting on the past months. He thought about the officer he had been, impulsive and arrogant, and the man he was becoming, patient, empathetic, and aware of his influence on others. He thought about Daniels, whose calm guidance and unwavering belief in second chances had changed the course of his life. He realized that the lessons he had learned were not just about policing. They were about life, about responsibility, and about the power of personal growth. Cole's journey had taught him that mistakes do not define a person, but how one responds to them does. He had faced his own failure, confronted it honestly, and allowed it to guide him toward change. In doing so, he had become a better officer, a better mentor, and a better human being. The next morning, Cole arrived at the station with a renewed sense of purpose. He greeted Daniels, who smiled and nodded in acknowledgement. Their relationship had shifted from that of superior and subordinate to one of mutual respect and mentorship. Cole understood now that leadership was not about titles or authority. It was about guiding, inspiring, and helping others become the best version of themselves. As the day went on, Cole led a training session with a group of new recruits. He shared his experiences openly, not hiding the mistakes he had made, but emphasizing the lessons learned. He spoke about the importance of empathy, listening, and integrity. The recruits listened intently, clearly moved by his honesty and sincerity. Cole realized that the mistakes he had once feared would define him were now becoming a tool to inspire growth in others. Later that evening, Cole returned to the community center for a program he had helped establish. Children and parents greeted him warmly, sharing stories of positive interactions with the police. Cole listened, laughed, and offered guidance where needed. He felt a profound sense of fulfillment. The work he had done was making a real difference, and he knew it was only possible because he had faced his own shortcomings head-on. As Cole walked home that night, the streetlights casting a warm glow on the sidewalks, he reflected on the journey that had begun with a single, regrettable act. He had been confronted with his own flaws, challenged to grow, and guided by a man who had shown him the power of patience, dignity, and leadership. The transformation had been gradual, sometimes difficult, but ultimately life-changing. Cole understood that this was just the beginning. Life would continue to test him, and there would always be moments of frustration or doubt. But he now possessed the tools to navigate those challenges with integrity, humility, and empathy. He had learned that true leadership is measured not by authority or fear, but by the ability to inspire, guide, and uplift others, even in the face of past mistakes. By the time Cole reached his front door, he felt a deep sense of peace. He knew that the man he had once disrespected had become the mentor who changed his life, and that his own growth had begun to ripple outward, impacting the community, the department, and the people he served. The journey that had started with shame and regret had transformed into a story of redemption, learning, and hope. Cole paused for a moment, looking up at the night sky. The stars twinkled softly as if signaling that the future was full of possibilities. He smiled, knowing that he had embraced his past, learned from it, and used it to shape a better present and future. And in that moment he realized that the most important lessons